The day you stop managing everyone's feelings, you get your own back. Carl Jung observed that the mask we perfect for the comfort of others has a strange habit of growing into the face underneath, until one day you go looking for yourself and find only the mask looking back. Here is where we begin. Plainly, Jung wrote in his 9th volume, paragraph 221, that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is. And Jung would stop you right there and say, do you see it? The very thing you built to be seen is the thing now hiding you. The role of the one who smooths every room, who reads every face before it can fall. Who carries the emotional weather of a marriage, or a family, or an office on her own back, like luggage nobody else notices, is heavy. That role was never you. It was a garment you put on so early and so often that you forgot there was a body underneath it, still breathing, still wanting, still grieving things nobody asked about. And something in that, if you are honest tonight, lands close to home. And you are not the only one sitting with that recognition. This pattern has quietly organized more lives than most people would ever admit out loud. So let me speak plainly for a moment. In the first person, the way a resolution ought to be spoken, I stop performing calm I do not feel. I let my own feelings take up room in the room. I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I stop performing calm I do not feel. I let my own feelings take up room in the room. I make the unconscious conscious. Again. I stop performing calm I do not feel. I let my own feelings take up room in the room. I make the unconscious conscious. And if you would like tomorrow's teaching to find you the way this one did, consider subscribing, quietly. No fuss, just so the thread is not lost. Now, before we go further, if something in you just went a little quiet reading that resolution, type the 2 words "face it" in the comments, not as a performance for anyone watching, just as a small private seal on what you already know is true. The first key is this: the feelings manager is a mask, not a self. Picture the role for a moment, the one who senses a shift in someone's tone before they have finished the sentence, who reroutes an argument before it starts, who apologizes for weather nobody controls. That is a persona, built with real skill, earned in real rooms, often as a child in a house where someone's moods were the actual climate, and a small person learned to read the sky before it stormed. Think of an ordinary dinner table from 30 years ago, a father's silence that could fill a whole house, a mother's sigh that meant everyone had better sit very still, and somewhere at that table a child, maybe 8 years old, quietly learning to watch faces the way sailors watch clouds, learning that her own hunger, her own boredom, her own small sadness could wait, because something bigger needed tending first. Nobody handed her a mask and told her to wear it. She built it herself, out of necessity, the way a hand builds a callus. And notice how the same small skill simply changes address as the years pass. The child who once read her father's silence becomes the employee who reads her manager's mood before the meeting even opens, becomes the friend who senses a text going cold before the reply arrives, becomes the partner who feels an argument gathering 3 rooms away and is already softening her voice before anyone has said a word. The setting changes, the skill does not, and because it works, because it keeps rooms calm and keeps people fond of her, nobody along the way ever asks the obvious question: whose face is underneath all this watching? Jung taught that a persona is a negotiated compromise between the individual and society, a mask agreed upon so that living together does not become unbearable. And there is nothing shameful in wearing one. Every clerk wears the clerk. Every parent wears the parent at the school gate. The trouble starts only when you forget that the mask is a mask. When you stop being a person who happens to manage feelings well and start believing you are, at your core, nothing but the manager, the fixer, the calm one, the one who is fine. Notice how naturally that sentence rolls off the tongue. I am fine, said not as a report, but as a job title, a title nobody ever formally offered her, and she never once thought to decline. And once that belief sets in quietly enough, every one of your own feelings has to apply for permission before it is allowed to exist. because the manager has no schedule for grief, no slot for anger, no patience for her own fear. She is too busy running the room, watching the door, keeping the temperature even for people who never once thought to ask if she was warm enough herself. Ask yourself plainly, when was the last time someone in that room asked how you were and actually waited long enough for the true answer? Consider even the small giveaway of it, how quickly the question comes back at you, and you find, and how rarely, and yet the asking, they never notice the swap has happened at all. So the first thing to see, plainly, without drama, is that the exhausted feeling you carry home some evenings is not proof you are simply built this way, not proof of some flaw in your wiring. It is proof you are wearing something you forgot you put on so long ago it started to feel like skin. I wear the mask. I am not the mask. The second key is this. Identification with the role is the actual disease, Jung wrote, in his 7th volume, that a man can acquire an artificial personality and wear it without punishment for a long while. And he liked to point out how a professor can identify so completely with his subject that he becomes, in effect, the textbook he teaches from, stiff with authority, unable to be simply a man in a room anymore. The same thing happens to the one who manages everyone's feelings. She does not just perform calm, she becomes calm's employee, on call at all hours, with no shift ever ending. And here is the quiet cruelty of it. The more perfectly you play the part, the more everyone around you comes to depend on the performance. So the mask that once protected you now has a family, a marriage, an office, all leaning their weight against it, which means you cannot simply take it off on a Tuesday evening, even when you are utterly finished, because too much now rests on it standing upright. Think of a house where the walls have quietly become load-bearing. Nobody built them to hold up the roof, but over the years, without a single conversation about it, everything shifted. The shelves went up, the extra room got added, the whole structure leaned in and settled, and now if you took even one of those walls out for a moment just to breathe, the whole house groans around you, and you feel the groan as your fault, as though your tiredness were the crack in the foundation rather than a perfectly reasonable request for rest. Notice, too, how the disease disguises itself as virtue. Nobody praises a wall for standing there, but everybody praises the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never makes a scene. And that praise, however kindly meant, is a kind of nail. It fastens the mask a little more firmly each time it lands, so that even your good reputation becomes another reason you cannot set the thing down. Picture, for a moment, an ordinary Sunday afternoon. The kind that looks like nothing at all. A phone rings and it is a sibling needing to be talked down from a small crisis, and you do it, gently, capably, the way you always have. And 20 minutes later a friend texts, upset about something at work, and you find the right words for her too. And by the time the afternoon ends and someone finally asks how was your day, the true answer would be, I do not actually know. I was too busy being useful to check. That not knowing is not a small thing. It is the exact spot where the disease Jung described takes hold, not in the helping itself, which is often real and often kind, but in the total absence of a self, left over afterward to ask the question. And consider a second scene, years later, at that same sibling's kitchen table. A small crisis has passed, and someone jokes, half admiring, half careless, "Oh, you always know what to say." And something in you, hearing it, feels less like being seen and more like being filed, correctly, under a heading, the reliable one. And you laugh along, because that is also part of the role. An actor who never leaves the theater does not become a better actor. He simply forgets there was ever a person under the costume. And consider one more ordinary picture. A woman at her own birthday dinner, watching the table, still counting who has been served, still reading whether the conversation has gone quiet too long, on the one evening of the year meant to be entirely for her, and nobody at that table is cruel, nobody asked her to keep working. She simply no longer knows how to stop, and this is Jung's real warning, quieter than it first sounds, that the mask is never punished for being worn, it is only ever the wearer who pays. Slowly, in the coin of a self that grows harder and harder to locate, until even solitude does not feel like relief anymore, because there is no one left standing there to enjoy it. And until even a compliment meant kindly starts to feel like one more brick in the wall. So the second key asks you to notice not the role itself, which may be skillful and even good, but the moment the role stopped being something you do and became the only thing anyone, including you, believes you are. I play the part does not play me. The third key is this. Your own feelings do not vanish while you manage everyone else's. They simply go where you cannot see them, and this is the mechanism underneath everything else in this teaching. Follow one ordinary day and watch it happen. At 7 in the morning, you sense your partner's silence and soften your voice before you have had coffee, your own mood already placed second. By 9, you are absorbing a co-worker's frustration in a meeting, translating his complaint into something gentler, filing your own view away unspoken. By noon, you have asked 3 people how they are doing and answered your own version with fine, a word so automatic it barely passes through awareness. By 2, your jaw is tight and you have no memory of when it clenched. By 4, a friend calls upset and you become, without deciding to, a small emergency service. And the part of you that wanted, badly, to be heard for once, steps back again to make room. By 7, you are managing a child's disappointment while making dinner, entirely turned outward. And by 9 at night, you sit down and feel a strange flatness, an irritability with no object. A tiredness sleep does not touch, and you wonder what is wrong with you. But nothing is wrong with you. Your feelings queued up all day, behind everyone else's, and were never let through the door. And a feeling told not now often enough eventually stops asking permission and goes underground. Think of it as an unpaid bill. The first notice set aside for a busier week. The second set aside too. The lights stay on. The mail keeps coming. The debt has not vanished. It has only stopped announcing itself politely. And this is exactly what an evening of postponed feeling does inside a person. Nothing collapses that night, which is why the habit feels, for years, like it costs nothing. Jung's teaching on the shadow applies with real precision here. What is refused consciousness does not disappear, it thickens in the dark, and the parts of you refused all day are not villainous. They are simply your grief, your anger, your fear, denied a seat at their own table because the table was always set for everyone else first. Consider a man who spent 20 years as the reasonable one at his office, and one afternoon, over a printer that had simply run out of paper, he found himself gripping the machine with both hands, breathing hard, out of all proportion to a printer. But the printer was never the cause. It was simply the nearest door 20 years of unexpressed frustration finally found open. Imagine too a woman who spent a decade as the calm center of a difficult family, until one Tuesday, over a misplaced set of keys, she found herself in tears at the kitchen counter, baffled by her own reaction. But the keys were never the cause either. 10 years of postponed feeling arriving all at once through the nearest available door. And imagine a third case, quieter still, a man who never once raised his voice at home in 15 years, praised by everyone for his patience, who found one evening that he could not stop weeping over a television commercial that meant nothing to him at all. An unattended inner life does not politely wait its turn forever. It waits until the pressure exceeds the container, and then comes out sideways, as a temper nobody expected, as tears over nothing, as a heaviness on Sunday you cannot name. And notice how quiet the whole process is while it happens. There is no dramatic moment where you decide to stop feeling your own feelings. There is only 1,000 small moments where someone else's need arrived first and seemed more urgent, more worth attending to, than your own faint signal underneath it, each one reasonable on its own, which is exactly why the pattern can run for years before anyone, including you, notices the shape it has made. So the third key, quietly, is this: that flat feeling at the end of your day is not emptiness. It is a room full of your own unattended feelings, waiting, patiently at first, and then not so patiently. And the debt does not forgive itself simply because you are too busy to notice it accruing. I open the door before the debt comes due. The fourth key is this. The mask itself was never the enemy, only the exclusive loyalty to it. Jung recalled in his memoirs that as a boy, he lived with what he called his number one personality, the ordinary schoolboy self that went to class and did his lessons and got along with the other boys, and his number two personality, older, quieter, connected to something larger than the classroom, something almost timeless, and he did not resolve this by killing one to save the other. He learned instead to live with both, giving each its due, letting the schoolboy have his mornings and the older self have its evenings. And this is precisely what the feelings manager forgets, that persona and self were never meant to be enemies. A mask worn consciously is simply a tool. The same way a coat is a tool, you put it on when the weather calls for it and you take it off indoors, and nobody mistakes the coat for the body. The trouble only starts when the coat is worn so constantly, in every room, in every season, that you forget you own a body underneath it at all. So picture the correction plainly. Persona is a role you consciously choose to play. Shadow is what you refuse to look at. And the danger for the feelings manager is never that she plays a role. It is that she has quietly stopped being able to tell the difference between playing it and being nothing else. Consider an ordinary man who is, by every account, the fun one at every gathering, the one who arrives with the right joke, who smooths every lull in conversation, who makes sure nobody feels left out of the laughter, and this costs him nothing at the party itself. He chose it, he enjoys it, and he drives home afterwards still himself, still able to sit in silence in the car without needing to perform for anyone. That is a mask worn well, reversible, chosen, put on for the evening and taken off at the door. Now consider another man, doing the very same thing at the very same parties, except that somewhere along the way he lost the door. He cannot find the silence in the car anymore. The joke does not stop when the party ends. It follows him home, into the kitchen, into bed, because he no longer remembers what his own face looks like without an audience in front of it. Both men wore the identical mask, but only one of them still owned it. Imagine, too, someone who spent 30 years known in her family as the strong one, the one who never fell apart. And then a season comes when the role is simply no longer required of her. The crisis has passed, the family has scattered, and she finds, to her own confusion, that she does not know what she feels when nobody is depending on her not to feel it. And notice the honest ache in that. It is not that she wants the crisis back. It is that she never learned a version of herself that exists without one. That is the exact fork this key is pointing toward. Not whether the mask was ever worn, but whether a door was ever left in it. I choose the coat. The coat does not choose me. There is one more sentence I want to leave with you before the deeper key opens, and it is simply this. Take a slow breath now if you have followed this far, because subscribing here means the next teaching finds you the same quiet way this one did. The fifth key is the one that turns the lens back toward you, so let us take it slowly, in 5 pieces, because it deserves the room, and because this is the key most people rush past on their way to feeling better, which is exactly why it stays unlearned, and I would rather you sit in the discomfort of it with me for a while than skip ahead to a comfort that has not been earned yet. First, consider what happens in the body the day you stop, not in theory, but in the actual hour. You do not soften your voice before the hard conversation. You let the silence in the car stay uncomfortable. Someone asks, "How are you?" and you do not answer, "Fine." And what rises is rarely relief. It is dread, a tightening at the throat, a feeling the room itself might tilt without your constant small adjustments. Notice how the body keeps its own ledger. A stomach that clenches at the thought of staying quiet, a hand reaching for the phone before the mind finishes the thought, shoulders rising the instant a silence stretches a beat too long. This is a nervous system trained for years to treat other people's discomfort as your emergency. And training like that does not dissolve because you decided, intellectually, that it should. Sit with the dread rather than obeying it. It is not evidence disaster is coming. It is evidence of how completely you believed the room's stability was your job. Jung would call this an inflation of the ego's importance disguised as humility. You were never holding up the sky, you only told yourself you were, and the dread now is only an old habit protesting its retirement. Notice too how the body will try to bargain with you in that very moment, offering one more small fix, one more soothing word, just this once, and the discipline is simply to notice the offer and decline it, gently, the way you might decline a second helping you no longer want. Second, consider what happens to the people around you when you stop, and honesty is required here. Sometimes they are relieved. They never needed managing as much as you assumed. They were capable adults the whole time, only accustomed to you doing their emotional labor, and sometimes they are not relieved at all, sometimes frustrated, even accusatory, because your management was a service they had quietly come to expect. Imagine a woman who spent 15 years calling her siblings before every holiday to smooth disputes before they reached her parents, and one November she simply does not make the call, and what greets her is not gratitude, but a flurry of wounded messages asking why she has gone quiet, as though her silence itself were the offense. And imagine a brother, never once thanking her for a decade of quiet peacekeeping, suddenly noticing out loud that this year feels tense, not realizing the tension was always there beneath her constant translating. This is the real test of the mask, not whether you can take it off, but whether you can bear the discomfort of others while you do. Jung's teaching on withdrawing a projection applies here. The people you managed were not only receiving your care, some of them were leaning their own unfelt feelings onto your capable shoulders too. So when you stop, you are not only reclaiming your feelings, you are handing theirs back, and that exchange is rarely graceful. Pause a moment now and pick one real relationship where this exchange has never once been tested, and simply notice what your body does at the thought of testing it. Notice whether the thought alone makes you want to reach for your phone and smooth something that has not even happened yet. Third, and this part is easiest to miss, consider what you actually find underneath the mask when you finally look. And I will not promise gold waiting patiently. Sometimes what is underneath is grief you postponed for a decade, or anger you never let yourself feel toward the very people you were busy soothing, or plain exhaustion with nowhere polite to go. This is not failure. This is the bill for years of unpaid labor arriving. Jung's whole teaching on individuation rests on this willingness to meet what is actually there rather than what you hoped would be there. The goal was never a person with no feelings needing management. The goal is a person allowed to have feelings at all. Imagine someone who spent 40 years as the household's emotional thermostat, and in the quiet, after that role ends, sits with an afternoon that asks nothing of her, and finds it almost unbearable, not because she is empty, but because she has forgotten the shape of her own wanting. She opens the refrigerator without hunger, starts 3 tasks and finishes none, reaches for the phone to check on someone who needs no checking, and if she stays with that unbearable quiet a little longer, an old sadness surfaces, about a life spent tending everyone's temperature but her own, and a flicker of anger at how naturally everyone assumed she would keep doing it. Neither feeling is comfortable, but both are finally hers, without an audience to perform them for. That unbearable quiet is not a wall, it is a door standing slightly open. Fourth, consider how this pattern shows up, not only in the dramatic moments, but in the small forgettable ones. The friend who asks which restaurant, and you say either is fine, before asking yourself what you actually want. The family gathering where you quietly take the uncomfortable chair so someone else has the good one. The meeting where a good idea of yours goes unspoken so someone else's does not look weaker beside it. None of these feel like anything alone. That is what makes them dangerous. One instance of setting your preference aside is kindness, but a life built out of thousands of such instances, never once offset by a moment of your own preference being asked for first, becomes the very habit this key is trying to help you see. Consider keeping, for one ordinary day this week, a private tally, nothing shared with anyone, simply a running count of every small moment you set your own feeling aside for someone else's comfort, and at day's end, look at the number, not to judge yourself, but to see the pattern in daylight, Most people are startled how high it climbs before lunch, and startled too at how automatic each single entry felt while it was happening, as though the choosing had already been made somewhere behind the scenes before you ever noticed a choice was on offer at all. Fifth, and this piece asks for patience rather than insight, none of this arrives in one sitting. The dread does not vanish because you named it once. The disruption in others does not resolve in a single honest conversation. The grief underneath does not empty itself in one evening of finally feeling it. You will stop and start. You will manage a room out of old habit on a Tuesday and catch yourself doing it again on Wednesday and feel foolish for the relapse. This is not the failure of the work. Jung's own descent into his own inner material took years, not an afternoon. So if 3 weeks in, you are still catching the pull to smooth and fix, still apologizing for feelings needing no apology, that is not failure. That is what this key actually looks like in an ordinary life. And if 3 months in, you notice the pull has grown quieter, not gone, only quieter, that quieting is the whole of the progress most people are ever given, and it is enough. So hold those 5 pieces together: the dread when you stop, the disruption in others when you stop, the unglamorous grief underneath when you finally look, the 1,000 small forgettable moments that built the habit, and the slow uneven pace at which all of it unfolds, and you will see the whole shape of the 5th key. That getting your own feelings back is not a reward that arrives gently, it is a repossession, and repossessions are rarely comfortable for anyone in the house. I let the discomfort be the doorway, not the danger. The 6th key is this, and it is meant to sit gently after everything just said, that reclaiming your own feelings does not require abandoning your care for others. It only requires that care stop being compulsory, unconscious, and one-directional. Jung's teaching was never that the caring self is false, only that a caring self chosen freely is worth infinitely more than one performed out of old fear. A conscript and a volunteer can carry the exact same weight up the exact same hill, and yet one is ground down by it, while the other is quietly built up by it. The weight is not the problem, the compulsion is. Picture a father who for years could not sit through a family dinner without smoothing every friction before it finished forming. A sharp word, a child's sulk, a wife's tired sigh, all intercepted before anyone else even felt it. And imagine one evening he simply does not. He lets his own tiredness show plainly, instead of hiding behind a patient smile. And nothing collapses. The dinner continues, a little rawer, a little more honest. And afterward, he is not drained the way he usually is, because the care he finally did offer was chosen rather than extracted. That is the whole turn, the difference between a hand that gives because it was never permitted to close, and a hand that opens on purpose. And consider too a mother at her daughter's birthday party, the kind of afternoon that once cost her days of dread beforehand, managing every guest's mood, steering the cake and the seating so nothing could go wrong. And this year the cake arrives late, a seating mistake bruises someone's feelings, and instead of leaping to repair it, she lets the small disorder pass through the room like weather. And standing at the edge of her own party for once instead of running it, she actually sees her daughter's face, something she had missed at every birthday before because she was always half a room ahead, managing what had not yet happened. So the practice is small. Notice the old pull to smooth, to fix, to adjust yourself before your own feeling has finished arriving. Name it quietly. There is the pull again. Let one such moment pass unobeyed. Let the silence stay a beat too long. Let fine go unspoken while you check what is actually true. And if you still wish to give your care, give it. But notice how differently a hand moves when it opens on purpose, rather than out of old fear of what happens if it stays closed. This is not cruelty toward those you love. It is the beginning of an honest accounting, and it does not finish in a week. A role worn for 20 years does not come off in an evening. The day you finally stop managing everyone's feelings does not arrive as one dramatic exit. It arrives in small refusals like this one, repeated, until your own feelings simply show up on time, unasked, and you let them stay, and your care for others, no longer compulsory, becomes at last something you recognize as your own. I make room for my own feelings, quietly, starting now. Here is the whole picture. The mask you wear to manage every room was never your whole self. Wearing it was never the disease. Forgetting it was a mask became the disease. Your own feelings did not disappear while you tended everyone else's. They went underground and thickened there. The mask and the self were never meant to be enemies, only kept honestly separate. And the day you finally set the mask down, dread comes first, disruption in others comes second, and only then, quietly, does your own grief and your own gladness come forward to meet you, not as punishment, but as everything that was always rightfully yours, waiting. And seen this way, all 6 keys were never 6 separate lessons at all. They were 6 turns of one single key. The recognition that a self left unattended long enough will always announce itself eventually, gently if you let it, roughly if you do not. There is no product at the end of this, no course, no next step to purchase, only the plain fact that a life spent entirely in service of everyone else's weather was never the whole of what was asked of you. Jung's whole teaching on individuation begins exactly here, at the willingness to become a person rather than remain merely a useful function in other people's lives. And that willingness costs something, but it is a debt worth paying, because on the other side of it is not selfishness, it is simply you, present, felt, no longer managed out of your own life. I stop performing calm I do not feel, I let my own feelings take up room in the room, I make the unconscious conscious. And so the question I will leave sitting quietly by the fire with you tonight is simply this. On the day you finally stop managing everyone's feelings, and your own come walking back through that open door, will you recognize them well enough to let them in?